You are looking at the moment International lost their minds and put a tractor in a pickup, the 1300D. This is not a normal truck built for a Sunday drive. This is a 4-ton industrial anomaly that was never supposed to have a license plate. In the late 1960s, International Harvester stopped trying to compete with Ford and Chevy. Instead, they decided to commit an act of mechanical insanity. They took the heavy-duty components from their failing tractor division and stuffed them into a civilian cab. It has a frame that belongs on a bridge, axles designed for a combine, and a BG series iron heart that refuses to acknowledge the existence of the EPA. But there is a hidden reason why this truck is technically too tough for modern roads, a secret buried in its unsynchronized gearbox that nearly bankrupted the company. Why did the world's most honest truck become a legal liability for the people who built it? A red International Harvester. 1300D sits abandoned in a cornfield. The color not just any red, but the original International Harvester red. Scarlet with a hint of orange. The same hue you will still find in Tractor Supply catalogs and on battered cans of Rust-Oleum. The badge on the fender reads 1 ton, cast in heavy chrome, a number that meant something before marketing departments got their hands on it. This truck does not blend in with the landscape. It looms, a slab of iron and intent, looking less like a vehicle and more like a relic dumped by a retreating glacier. The photograph is not just nostalgia bait, it is a warning label from the past. This was the moment when International Harvester, desperate and boxed in by the big three, raided its own parts bin and decided to build a pickup out of whatever was left in the tractor warehouse. The result is a machine that weighs nearly 4 tons empty, wears a frame designed for bridge construction, and carries a badge first stamped in the 1965 New Trail Boss ads. Early dealer photos show that badge proud and polished. Later, some were wiped clean by mechanics who knew what was coming. Behind the field shot, a corporate letterhead scrolls by, teal blue, the old International logo, the kind of paperwork that once promised innovation and now reads like a death notice. The gap between that glossy brochure and the rusted-out beast in the field is the story of a company on the edge. By the late 1960s, International Harvester's boardrooms were running out of options and time. The red paint, the badge, the empty horizon, every detail is a clue. This is not just a truck. It is a last stand, staged in the open before the lights went out on the old way of building things. The boardroom at Melrose Park did not smell of optimism in the winter of 1968. It smelled of cold coffee, stale cigar smoke, and the metallic tang of panic. Minutes from those months tell a story in staccato, motions introduced, votes tallied, but always circling the same drain: how to keep the plant open without spending a dime on new tooling. A phrase appears, almost ritualistic: avoid new tooling. That line is underlined in the margin, probably by a secretary who'd seen enough layoffs to know what came next. Union pressure arrived in thick envelopes, each stamped with the United Auto Workers crest and the kind of language that does not bluff. The Stay the Plant memo from Local 123 landed on the boardroom table in January 1969, demanding job security and warning of a strike if the company tried to shutter the line. The board's vice president, John Gillespie, read the letter aloud, pausing on the words "no new tooling" like they were a lifeline and a noose at the same time. In the background, municipal lobbyists from Chicago City Hall dangled a tax abatement, but only if the plant kept running and the jobs stayed put. The emergency proposal was scribbled out in blue ink: repurpose tractor hardware for a light truck, keep the presses hot, and pray the numbers worked out. The final vote was 6 in favor and 3 against. Dissenters warned of brand dilution, but the gavel fell anyway. The directive locked in cross-platform engineering, tractor engines in pickup cabs, and the fate of hundreds of jobs riding on a gamble that would turn a farm implement into a 1-ton outlaw. The ink was barely dry before the factory floor started prepping old tractor castings for a new, very different kind of harvest. The 1300D's story starts with a block of iron that feels more at home on a combine than a pickup. The BG241 and V304 engines were not just borrowed from the corn-binder tractor line, they were dragged over, unapologetically agricultural, and bolted in with the kind of confidence that comes from decades in the field. These engines were not built for highways. They were cast for relentless work, forged from high nickel iron that shrugs off heat and fatigue. Metallurgical records from the era show the BG241's nickel content over 2%, with the V304 climbing even higher. That is not a marketing claim. It is visible in micrographs where nickel-rich carbides glint through a fine pearlitic matrix. A 1969 metallurgist's note reads, "Unusually ductile for cast iron, intended for continuous agricultural load, not intermittent highway duty." When the 1300D idles, it does not just run, it simmers. The block alone weighs as much as a modern four-cylinder, anchored by bolts thick enough to make a bridge inspector pause. The BG241 delivers 141 horsepower at 3,200 revolutions per minute, but the real story is torque, enough to drag a baler through mud or rip a dead oak from the ground. Every cylinder wall is overbuilt, every bearing surface oversized, because breakdowns are not an option in the middle of harvest. The V304 diesel, introduced for heavier duty versions, pushes out 309 pound-feet of torque, but even the gasoline block is built to last. These engines do not wear out, they just wear you down. Beneath it all sits a C-channel frame, more bridge girder than truck rail. 3 inches thick at the rail, 2 inches deep, likely rolled from ASTM A572 grade 50 steel, the same grade used in cranes and overpasses. Blueprints from the Wisconsin Historical Society show cross-bracing straight from tractor undercarriage design. Welds are thick, gussets unyielding. The rails weigh in at 3.45 pounds per foot, with quarter-inch fillet welds at every joint, each followed by a stress relief bake at 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not a frame that flexes, it resists, stubborn as a mule. Build a truck from a tractor's parts bin and you get something too heavy, too honest, too much for the job. But that is the point. The 1300D was built to outlast the men who assembled it, to work until the farm or the company itself finally gave out. Beneath the 1300D, the Dana 70 rear axle anchors the truck with unapologetic heft. Forged from solid steel and weighing in heavier than some entire cars, it is the kind of component you would expect on a dump truck, not a pickup. The 4.10:1 gear ratio is stamped right into the housing, a number that means little to most, but for anyone who has ever tried to pull a loaded trailer out of a muddy field, it is a promise. Dana's 1969 service bulletins rated the axle for 7,500 pounds at the wheels, a figure that dwarfs the so-called heavy-duty axles found on today's trucks. Modern pickups may boast about strength, but the Dana 70 is the real deal, overbuilt, unyielding, and entirely indifferent to comfort. That indifference comes at a cost. Every pound of unsprung mass from the Dana 70 transmits straight through the leaf springs, turning every pothole into a minor earthquake. Ride. Comfort is an afterthought. The experience is closer to riding a hay wagon than a family car. One restoration owner on the Red Power magazine forums described it as driving a steel anvil across a washboard, though he also recounted welding a broken spring in the field with just a battery and some fence wire. The axle didn't complain. Above that rolling fortress, the wiring harness takes a different approach: radical simplicity. Instead of a tangled web of wires, the 1300D relies on a single bus, one-wire system. Headlights, ignition, wipers all draw power from the same copper line. It is a setup more at home on a tractor than a truck, and repairs are as straightforward as a pocket knife and tape. Lose power, splice in a new section, and keep going. But that simplicity brings risk. One corroded connection, one mouse nest, and the entire truck can go dark. Warranty records from 1970 show a spike in electrical complaints, most traced to moisture creeping into the harness where it threads through the C-channel frame. Midwest winters and road salt proved a worthy adversary. Yet for every complaint, there is a story of stubborn survival. Owners speak of the one-wire system with a mix of frustration and respect. The Dana 70 and that single bus harness form a partnership, brute strength and bare-bones honesty. This is not a truck that hides its roots. It is a tractor with a cab, and if you know its quirks, it will pull the world behind it, one wire and one axle at a time. The NP435 gearbox sits at the heart of the 1300D like a steel bouncer at a union bar, unforgiving, unblinking, and immune to excuses. This is not the kind of transmission you find in a grocery getter. It is a 4-speed, unsynchronized brute, lifted straight from the heavy truck line, designed in an era when men were expected to know their way around a clutch pedal and a wrench. There is no margin for error, no electronic limp mode, no hand-holding. If you do not know how to double-clutch this gearbox, it will literally fight you back. It is not a defect, it is a security system against anyone who is not a real driver. The double-clutch sequence reads like a ritual: clutch in, shift to neutral, clutch out, wait for the engine to spin down, clutch in again, then slam it into the next gear. Miss a beat, and the gears grind like a pair of millstones. The NP435 does not hide its contempt for the unskilled. Service bulletins from the period spell it out in cold type. Improper shifting leads to accelerated wear, sheared teeth, and warranty claims that pile up like snowdrifts in a Chicago winter. The numbers tell the rest of the story. Internal warranty ledgers from 1970 and 1971 show a 42% spike in transmission-related claims, most tagged with the same 2 words: gear grind. This was not just a trickle of complaints, it was a flood. Dealers filed defect protocol forms by the stack, each one a bill for parts, labor, and lost time. Mechanics learned to keep spare input shafts and bearing kits on the shelf because odds were another 1300D would limp in by the week's end, its gearbox howling for mercy. Dr. Aaron Cheng, a powertrain engineer who has spent a career dissecting heavy truck transmissions, put it bluntly. You can overbuild an engine, you can overbuild a frame, but marry them to a box that demands a trucker's touch, and you are gambling with your balance sheet. The NP435 was never meant for the faint of heart or the faint of foot. Every failed shift was a lesson in humility, paid for in warranty dollars and broken pride. A cost chart from the period shows the sting in black and red ink. Each claim chipped away at the margin, each repair a reminder that the 1300D was, at its core, a tractor in a cab, built to last, but only if you knew how to drive it like you meant it. Federal regulations did not just arrive, they swept through the 1300D's world, clipboard in hand, rewriting the rules overnight. FMV SS121, the brake standard introduced in the early 1970s, required dual-circuit air brakes with split redundancy and rapid response. The 1300D's single-circuit system, borrowed from farm tractors, failed every major test. Stopping distances stretched too far, pedal pressures soared, and the quarter-second apply time was out of reach. Engineers scrambled to retrofit booster pumps and extra lines, but the frame was not built for this complexity. Each patch added weight, cost, and another weak spot for rust. Lighting brought no relief. FMV SS108 set strict standards for headlamp aim and side marker placement. The 1300D's lamp buckets, designed for fields not highways, missed both targets. Photometric test sheets flagged beams as too low and too wide, while the absence of side markers on early models forced dealers into a frenzy of aftermarket fixes. Service bulletins from late 1972 read like triage notes: install new markers immediately to avoid citation. The C-channel frame, never intended for so much wiring, became a maze of hastily drilled holes, each one a future leak. The Clean Air Act delivered the final blow. In 1974, the EPA's detuning order forced engineers to choke the V304 diesel, cutting fuel delivery and retarding timing. power dropped by 15%. The truck that once hauled with ease now struggled under its own weight. Owners complained, dealers filed for Clean Air Act waivers, and performance figures sank. Emission control kits such as intake restrictors, air pumps, and exhaust snorkels arrived piecemeal, and none restored lost torque. By 1975, retrofitting chaos was routine. Warranty claims surged as mechanics grafted new hardware onto a design never meant for it. Compliance costs soared. In April, International Harvester announced the end. The 1300D was withdrawn. Casualties of FMVSS, the EPA, and a regulatory tide no engineer could stem. Fewer than 300 International 1300D trucks are known to survive, and everyone is tracked like a rare coin in the hands of obsessed collectors. Hagerty's registry lists the model as vanishingly scarce, with auction house records confirming that clean original trucks have crossed the six-figure mark, numbers that would have made the Melrose Park board faint in 1969. The last 2 years have seen a spike in private sales, often brokered through restoration forums and word of mouth. One 1970 model, still wearing its battered 1-ton badge and original IH red, fetched $112,000 at a Midwest auction in late 2023. Another, a fire truck conversion with under 8,000 miles, drew a bidding war that ended with a museum curator wiring money before sunrise. Survivor registries read like a roll call of the stubborn. Names, serial numbers, frame stamps, and notes about which parts are still original and which have been patched with scrap steel or tractor hardware. The stories are always the same. Someone's grandfather refused to junk the thing, or a farmer welded the frame back together after a barn collapse. On collector forums, owners swap tales of hunting down Dana 70 axles in scrapyards or fabricating new wiring harnesses from scratch. The consensus is clear. This isn't just nostalgia. The 1300D's scarcity has become its own currency, a badge of honor for those who value iron over plastic, and a quiet rebuke to every accountant who ever called it obsolete. Some machines are built for the world as it is. The 1300D was built for the world after the lights go out. Survivalists and off-grid tinkerers have turned this truck into a legend, not because it is rare, but because it is immune to the future everyone else fears. The one-wire electrical system, so primitive it frustrated warranty clerks in 1970, now reads like a blueprint for EMP-proof resilience. There is no computer to fry, no sensor to fail, just a copper line and a toggle switch. On prepper forums, you will find hand-drawn diagrams showing how to bypass every circuit with a knife and some tape. One survivalist blogger writes that if the grid goes down, they will still have headlights. The V304 diesel, with its iron lungs and agricultural ancestry, does not care what comes out of the pump. Owners run these blocks on filtered fryer grease, home-brewed biodiesel, even straight vegetable oil in a pinch. There are step-by-step guides, sourced from Red Power magazine and Binder Planet threads, showing how to swap filters, tweak injector timing, and keep the corn binder heartbeat alive on whatever fuel the end times provide. The truck's exhaust smells like a county fair midway when it is running on canola. What started as a desperate corporate gamble has become a survivalist's holy grail. The 1300D is now mythic, a tractor with a cab, indestructible, simple, and ready for whatever tomorrow throws at it. There is a reason the sound of that engine idling, deep, uneven, honest as a sledgehammer on stone, still turns heads at dawn when the rest of the world is silent. Out here, a pickup built like a tractor isn't nostalgia, it's a warning for the future. As today's trucks trade iron for marketing plastic, the 1300D sits rusting but undefeated, a fossil of what happens when engineers outvote accountants. In a world allergic to overkill, its legacy is simple. Real work leaves scars, and some machines still outlast the men who built them. Drop your stories in the comments below.